Looks like we're ready to go. So what I'm going to do here at this time, I'm going to walk you through the new dashboard feature. We'll talk about the kind of the design behind it, where you go to either set it up or kind of create your own, and talk about different security permissions and things like that. So we'll start off just kind of with the basic of the the setup side of it. After that, we'll go more into how to create them, where the data is kind of pulling from, and then we'll kind of open it up for a little bit of Q&A at that time if there's any questions. So we'll start off with kind of the basics. So if everybody ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and if you see my screen with my mouse moving around here, hopefully, what we'll do then is we'll jump into the system setup area. So I'm going to go from the main menu up here. I'm going to go under Admin Manager. So hopefully you have access to this. I'm going to go to System Setup. And again, before I go too much further, I want to verify, can you all hear me? Just want to double check, because I know we have a lot of people on here, and I don't want to be, oh, yes. All right, thank you for the quick responses. Very good, very good. Okay. So here we are in our system setup. When we're talking about dashboards, yes, you can even hear me from Canada. That's awesome. So we're talking about dashboards. First of all, what we did is we added them into each role. So what that means is that each role will have its own dashboard. So let me just bring up the main menu again real quick. And you'll notice, for example, under Admin Manager, there's actually two dashboards. There's a manager dashboard and an owner dashboard. And you are able to assign those specifically to different security groups of who can access that specific dashboard. Now, as far as what you see within the dashboard itself, we'll get into that in a moment. But the first layer of access is, well, which dashboard should people be accessing? And again, it's role-based. So each dashboard will have their own unique, each role will have their own unique dashboard that's accessible through their menu if you have access to that area. Okay. Now we'll spend a lot of time mainly in the manager's dashboard, just because that's where we have a lot of things already in there, as well as I know where I've already kind of built a couple examples. Okay, going back into the security rights. So we're in system setup, knowing that each role has their own unique dashboard they can have set up. We're going to go into then our security settings. So from your system setup, you got your security settings. Let's open that up. Under the full user rights, there's this top layer. So with the Platinum interface, we've added a security control basically for every page you can access. Within each page, that's a different story of what you can do within there. But can you at least access the initial page? And you'll notice there's view the project manager dashboard. View anything that says dashboard. Let me just put in the word dashboard. And here we go. We can see here's all the different dashboards for each role, and which ones should this security group be able to access. So hopefully that's pretty clear, just a top level way of how you get different people to see different dashboards. So I would say as a creative, your dashboards, let me try to do a search for the dash there as a creative. Well, they can see the PM dashboard. The creatives, and again, this is my test data, so I apologize if anything seems a little odd or funny. But your creatives, you'd obviously want them to have the creative dashboard. Maybe you don't want them having the project manager dashboard. So you can, again, control per security group of which dashboards they should be able to access. Again, this is just high level. Hopefully that's understood at that point. So if you have access to that dashboard, well, what's next? Well, then we'll go to the main menu. We'll go under the admin manager for today's example. I'm going to go to the manager's dashboard. So if you have access to this dashboard, this is basically what you should be seeing. Now, each dashboard can be tailored to what that role should be looking at. So if this is more of a manager, sure, I want to see time entered overall, what advanced bill amounts we have open, how much time people have been entering by user. So there's a lot of variables that you can kind of incorporate into these pages. Now, of course, let's say you have users that have access to this page, but you don't want them editing this page. Again, that's another security right of, are you able to edit custom dashboards? There's a security right specifically for that. if they have that right, then they can edit this, and they can edit these graphs for everyone. So that's one security right to be mindful of who has the right to edit custom dashboards. But as long as you are able to access this page, you should be able to see the graphs and interact with any filters that are part of them. But if you don't have the edit rights, obviously you won't have the edit button up here, and you won't be able to change it for everyone. So hopefully these are kind of built or managed by your admins, and then that way they're kind of preset and ready to go. Now, if you are logged in, kind of playing along at home, and you're in the Platinum interface, you're able to go to these pages now. We have some kind of default kind of graphs built into each role's dashboard. Some may show data, some may not, just because of the nature of how they're built. Some have, they look at date ranges. So it's like looking at, let's say, time entered this month. Well, if no time has been entered that month, then that graph won't show anything. So there's different variables of what you might see with our kind of our preloaded graphs. So just kind of keep that in mind. But as we get more into this, you'll start to kind of see either the connection or get some ideas of what else you can do. Now, if I'm, let's say, an administrator and I have this dashboard, well, great. This is how I want my users to see it, per se. Then it's good to go. But let's say I want to kind of, move things around or rename a couple of these. Sure. Then as long as you have the ability to edit, then I can go into the edit menu, and you'll notice that all of the graphs have just kind of changed into kind of a little resizing tool. So what you're able to do at this point is you can move things around. You can say, you know what, I want the time entered by a user to be at the top. You can actually just drag and drop it to the top, and it shifts and moves around. So as soon as I save that, then it's committed to that change. Things kind of refresh a bit there. And now we have kind of a reorganized desktop. So just know that this desktop of the dashboards here is just kind of conforming to the, what widget or graph, better yet, is on top, and how wide it is. And then if there's enough room for the next one to butt up against it, then you'll see kind of two in the same row. So it's kind of free form a little bit at this time of what you want it to do. As far as the graphs themselves, so simply put, for the existing ones, again, if you can get in here and edit these, I'm going to go and click on the edit button. We'll get into the layout and filters in a moment, but really the settings tab is where you want to focus, because what do you want to name this? Sure, it's coming from a certain data set. We'll get to that in a moment. But what do you want to name this that makes it understood of, well, what is this graph going to show you? So this graph is called time entered by time and user. So hopefully that's enough information to realize what this widget or graph is showing you. I apologize if I'm using the word widget. I saw a question earlier with that word, and we call these graphs, and they're on the dashboards. So just to kind of clarify that. All right. Other things you can do is in terms of security. So if you need to have users have access to the same dashboard, but some of the graphs on that dashboard you want visible to some security groups but not others, well, that's where under the settings tab we have also that visible to. Now, by default, when you create a new graph, it's going to add every security group on there, because it's assuming whoever can access that specific dashboard should be able to access every graph on that dashboard. So that's why it's pretty straightforward. If you do it at a top level and you just say whoever can access that dashboard should be able to see every graph that's on that dashboard. That's the way the system is set up to go right out of the box. But if you're saying, if I have users from my account manager group access this page, and I just, for whatever reason, don't want them to access this graph on this page, okay, I could remove them from the visible to list and save that change. So anybody from that account manager group, if they log in and they go to this dashboard, they won't see this graph on there. Now that gets very detailed in terms of security, but it is available if you want it. All right, let me back out of that, and I'm not going to save my change there. So we'll just leave it as kind of the basic for now. Now let's talk about creating a graph. Now before I do that, I see some questions. I'll try to scroll back and answer some of those after I've done through the presentation. But we'll recap on those at the end here. But please keep submitting them, and I'll take a look at the end. Okay, as far as now building a graph. So where these graphs kind of came about is obviously it was a highly requested feature. Everyone kept wanting graphs and charts and more visual, and so that's where these dashboards came from. What these graphs are actually pulling from is our custom reports. So as a quick example, let me edit this one more time. Let me edit this graph. Under the settings tab, you'll notice it's pulling from a data set. So there's the, if any of you are familiar with creating custom time reports, there's time detailed data. So we're able to use that custom report data set as the background information that we're pulling into this graph. So what I've done in preparation for this is I have a series of webinar graphs that I've created just for today. So here's just some fun graphs I was throwing together. And to correlate this even further, what I've done is I not only created a graph, but I also created a custom report for each of these graphs that I have created. So let's just kind of start with the one that's in the top left. Time detail data by year. So this is what this graph is showing you is here's how much time has been entered each year in this account. So we can see 2014, we had 68.83 hours entered. But we put it into a visual format with a line graph to let you kind of see, the trend each year of all of the hours being entered. If I go back to my custom reports here, I have a custom report that I created with the same name to show this as an example. So the time detailed data by year is showing exactly the same information. It's just not as visual with a trending line. But we can see, okay, 2014, we had 68.83 hours. So we're seeing the same data being qualified, in a custom report as well as that dashboard. But we can see here's all of the time that's been entered over the couple of years. But I want to see it more in a visual timeline way. That's where these graphs are basically pulling from. Now, where we can also take things a little bit differently in the graph side is if you notice, this one's not only kind of a trending line, but we also have kind of a lower and upper target. So the idea there is, of the data you have, do you want to try to have kind of just some guidelines of where things should be falling in between? So that way you can see, okay, what went below the line and what went above the line. Now that's set up in the graph itself, which I'll get to at this point. Okay, just saw a couple of things fly by about data sets. So before you maybe even create a graph like this, because you're not going to know all the data endpoints and things like that, I always recommend create the custom report first. If you're looking for something specific, see if you can at least get the data first in a custom report. That way you have kind of a guideline to follow of, oh, hey, I want to see this, but in a graph. That's really what I think is a better connection. So if you're trying to say, okay, I want to see time entered by employee. Well, great. Let me run that report. Okay, I can see these two people. They've entered this much time this fiscal year per user. But I want to see them kind of, and again, you'll have systems with many, many more users and a lot more time. So again, this is just kind of test data. So you can imagine that this would be a very large report. And then if you get into creating a time report in this view, again, I only have 2 people. So my report's pretty small. But you could imagine if you had like 30 employees, okay, well, this is going to go, off the page here, if you will. So this graph would need to be kind of at a top level, would need to be its own thing, and you need to resize and kind of play with it so it kind of fits with what you're trying to see. Okay, so that will always be my first suggestion is if you're familiar with custom reports, then you will be able to be proficient with the dashboards. Now, just some basics of custom reports is if you have access to custom reports, so if I'm creating a new custom report, notice that there's these what we call data sets. So when we're trying to create a report, one of these graphs, we have to be very focused on a specific data point of the system. There is no custom report or graph that's going to say, let me pull from every field of data within the system. No, we've created these data sets to be more focused of a point of interest to allow you to kind of, then pull data that's related to that data point. I would say probably one of the biggest ones is a lot of clients want to see everything relating around time. So in my data sets of our custom reports, I'm going to just put in the word time. And here's that one called time detailed data. So like I said, a lot of you might be familiar with this one. And in that case, if you are, great. If you're not, what this report is this time detailed data is pulling every single time entry, not just total hours, but the amount of time entered per time entry. You can, of course, summarize and roll up the data, by user, by project, by year, a lot of different things. But this time detailed data is very specific to time entry. Knowing that we can get that level of detail into this type of a report, we want to then take that and summarize that into a graph. And so that's where, if I go now back into my dashboard, here's that graph. This pulls from time detailed data as well. And we're just saying summarize the total hours by employee in the fiscal year. So I can kind of hover over, each person's graph, or this is a bar graph, and I can see, okay, they worked 150 hours, in that range. So it gives us a lot of high-level detail, kind of crammed into this graph here, if you will. But again, it's about being focused of, here's the data I want to see, and I want to see it kind of presented in this way. Okay, again, I see more questions, so if anybody's able to answer anyone's questions in the chat, feel free to. But I'll kind of scan through that in a little bit here. Okay, so let's talk about creating a new graph. So you might see what we have, and you might give you some ideas at this point. But what about if I want to create something new? I want something that is custom to me. I will say that's kind of a loaded question at this time, because this feature is very new. There's a lot of variables that clients have been asking for that the system currently doesn't do. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. It's just we haven't had to track or report or account for things based on some of the feedback we've been getting. But it's great feedback, and we are actually updating a lot of the system to do things that people are requesting. So don't get too frustrated if you're not able to accomplish what you're trying to do. I would say at the end of this call, I'll answer some questions here. But if you have further questions of how to do something very specific of what you're looking for, definitely email your account manager. And that's simply just by shooting an email to support@workamajig.com and kind of give them some mock-ups or ideas, or write it out of what you're trying to accomplish in a graph, and we can kind of assist further. Maybe we need to then add new features to this of how to get that data. But I'll show you the basics here. So let's just start off and say, I want a report that shows how much time has been entered by client, for example. Let's go with that. So I'm going to go under my graphs. I'm going to say, let's edit. That edit button will now change into a new button. I'm going to click on the new button to start a whole new graph. So when I'm adding a graph, it lists all of the custom report data sets. So again, it's all based on custom reports. So if you can build it in a custom report, you can build it in here. In this case, I want to see how many hours have been entered by client. So I'm going to do that time detailed data. Again, that's kind of a mainstay custom report that a lot of people use. So I'll work with that one first. Time detailed data. This opens up the graph options. At this point, it just opens up graph type. We have bar graph. I'm going to drop it down. We have line graph, pie graph, and key metrics. So to kind of explain the difference, a bar graph is just saying, okay, if I have total hours per client, well, I want to see one bar per client, and I want that to be up or down based on how many hours we've entered per client. A line graph is more for saying I needed to see a trend. So if I'm going to build this report, of hours by client, a line graph doesn't really work, because we're not trending by client. Typically, if you're doing a line graph, you're going to be trending by date. So since we're not doing a date one right now, I would save that for that time. Pie graph is, bar graph and pie graph, I would say they're more aligned with each other, because you could either, how do you want to present, how many hours per client? Do you want to see it in a pie chart so you can see who's got the biggest slice? Or do you want a bar graph to see who has the tallest bar? Key metrics. This one is, I would probably say, one of the more fascinating ones to use, but it's also one of the more challenging ones to use. And I'll try to explain that more in a little bit, but that's a way you can kind of measure, like account balances, or certain numbers and figures and have them kind of lined up, and then of course filter it for certain things. But that one's very detailed. It's a little bit trickier to use, I will be honest. Pie graph and bar graph are really the easiest ones to use. I'll just start with a bar graph. Now, this is where it's going to be a little bit different than a custom report. So in a custom report, you can throw every field you want into that report. Here, we have to kind of qualify or quantify based off of two variables. So we have an x-axis and a y-axis, and they're going to be different fields. So you're not going to see the same list in both columns. So this is where if you're having trouble with getting the data you want to compare not show in the respective columns, let us know. We'll try to get that fixed. In the x-axis column, we wanted client. So let's find our client. I got some custom fields in there. Let's go by client ID. Hopefully that'll be easier. The y-axis is, we'll say, hours. We want our actual hours worked. Now we can roll it up and say, let's just summarize all of those hours by client. I'm going to go ahead and click refresh graph. So it gives you like a nice little preview. Oh, and here we go. Here's all the client IDs. Here's the total hours that we've worked for that client overall. I put no filter, no date range. So right now I'm just saying, show me the total hours for every client that we've ever done business with. So maybe before you hit refresh graph, because it might stall, especially with some of these clients that have a lot of data in here. So before we do that, we might even want to hop into the filters first. So hop into your filter. Let's add a new filter. And here we can say, let's filter things by date. When we're talking about time, well, we want to find time that's within a certain date range. So we want to say date worked when we're looking at this specific report. We don't want it to be equal to a date. We want it to be in our condition. And this is where we've been adding a lot more options here. So we can say, do I want to see all of the dates that have been worked in the last fiscal year, last month? So some of these filters that you put in here, what's nice about these is you can set up the report the way you want it to run, and then it updates each month automatically. Because if I say, this month, well, once it's the first of next month, well, then this graph kind of resets to how many hours have been entered in that month. Now, because this is test data and I don't necessarily have everything being recent, let's just go with last fiscal year. So if I say last fiscal year, and again, this might be something you want to do before you try to preview or refresh the graph because of just the amount of data that you have in your system. So some considerations there. Additionally, your filters can allow you to say, well, of these clients, maybe I want to exclude certain clients. So like if you have yourself set up as an overhead client, well, I don't need to see myself. So let's hide the April 2017 client. Again, this is test data. So in my filters, I might say, client ID, and we'll say not equal to that client. So I can exclude that from this graph. Let's go back to the layout and refresh. And now we see everyone except that one. So depending on how you want to set these up, a lot of different ways, obviously. But I would say the idea for a graph is you want to set it up in a way that it just runs without you having to ever modify it further or change things each month. You want it to just work that way every time you open up that graph. Okay, last part here is the settings tab. So in the settings tab, it just pulls in whatever the data set name was as the graph name. I'm going to now change this one, and we'll just say hours by client last fiscal year. So the name of the graph is telling us what this is about. So that way we should be able to just save it, run it, and just let it run, and not have to modify it further. Okay, so with having that graph name in there, it's going to change to that. There we go. I just clicked out and changed. One last part here that we have tab name. So this is where, again, you can kind of customize or personalize each dashboard separately. So we have a drop-down in the dashboard that will appear if we assign a tab name to that graph. And I'm going to assign it to webinar graphs. That's what I called it. Get my H in there, webinar graphs. And I'm going to go ahead and save this at this time. And it should, let me save and refresh, get to the bottom. There we go, hours by client last fiscal year. So look at that, there's that graph. Of course, it's a little squeezed a little higher here because the default was thinner. But again, I could modify the height, the width, move things around, and that might adjust the size a bit. But that's really the basics, I would say, of the graphs and getting those to work. Like I said, once you assign them to a tab name, so within, I'm in that admin manager dashboard. So within it, I'm able to have a drop down of different graphs. So we have the default. If there is no tab name, they're just in this home. As soon as you add a tab name, this button appears with the different tab names you've created. Now note that you don't create the tab names first. You put the tab name into each graph, and hopefully you spell everything correctly so they all group together in that name. And that just kind of creates the tabs. So again, there's a lot of neat ways you can customize this and use this to get that in there. Now let me go back down. Let's say that hours by client last fiscal year. Let's make that a pie chart because I got enough of these line and bar graphs up above. So let me go ahead and edit that. I'm going to edit the existing graph. Now note that you can't change what data set we're using. So if you find that this data set doesn't get the data you need, unfortunately, then you have to create a new graph and kind of start over. But if it's an existing graph, you can change the graph type. Now, if you change it from bar graph to pie graph, it doesn't change too much. But if you were to change it to, let's say, key metrics, well, that's a whole different process. So it starts over. But pie graph is very similar to a line graph. Because what we're seeing here is we're just seeing, oh, well, this client is the largest. Well, we saw that before in the bar graph because that client had the highest bar. So it just comes down to how do you want to see it, and those are the kind of your choices for the graph type. Now I'll go ahead and save that change so we see that on our dash. I'm going to resize it though because maybe I want that one to be larger. So they kind of auto resize based on how you kind of scale them on your dashboard there. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to think of what else. That should be that. Again, that's the basics. This is also a work in progress. So if there's feedback you have, please send it our way. If you're trying to do something very creative, very unique, very specific, let us know. I've been hearing requests for things like they want to see AGI compared to this or that and different things, and those are very complicated, to be honest. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It just we have to put some thought into, well, how do we get that? We tried to make these graphs be very straightforward and very simple to where it's like if you were able to create a custom report of it, you should be able to make a graph of it. But obviously, like custom reports have very advanced filtering calculations that you could throw into them as well. Well, those do apply into the graphs too, but it takes a little bit more effort to get it to flow in there. All right, I'm going to run through some questions at this time. Let me run through some of the questions I've already seen. Can you, again, we discussed a lot of the security rights. So hopefully it was clear on how you can access them. So again, to that security right is just because you have access in the settings of that graph, just because it's visible to you in this graph doesn't mean you can access it. So even though it's visible to, I wouldn't even worry about the visible to. I would focus more on who can access, this page itself. If you can access this page, you can see everything that's on it. So if you don't want somebody seeing this information, then make sure this specific dashboard, in this case, this is the admin manager's dashboard. So make sure they don't have access to that in their security rights. If you need more detail beyond that, well, yeah, we can always explore that. You can customize things. You can put them into those different tabs, different ways you can kind of manage it. So, Let's see, I'll scroll through some more of my questions. Unfortunately, at this time, we're not able to copy graphs. So I know that is kind of an enhancement request that we have heard. So if you have a need to create multiples of or similar of the same graph, please send us that information that's what you're looking for. But at this time, there's not a way to copy an existing graph. I'm going to kind of keep scrolling through here a little bit. Let's see. I think I've answered some of those. I'm still scrolling here. Okay, so one last thing I'll kind of point out here then is in the graphs themselves, there is filters. So again, this is my preference. I suggest making the graphs just work the way you want them to work. However, if you do want a graph to have filtering, meaning, okay, not only do I want it to show this detail, but maybe I want to be able to filter it down, like using a custom report. You're going, okay, well, this is showing me everybody, but I only want to see one person. You can actually add those filters. Let me go ahead and do a quick edit here of this one. Go to the filters tab. And so we can say, I want the user name equal to, and I'm going to go ahead and prompt that value. So like custom reports, if you make it a prompt, that's then what makes it be a filter in that graph. So I can then filter it down and say, I only want to see, that's Frank Rogers, search. I'm only seeing that one thing. So you can kind of extend filters, into the graphs. So it runs one way, but you can filter it down. Some neat things there. All right, let me scroll through. So recently, people have been asking for target limits. Yeah, there's target limits. I know there's a lot of asks for the key metrics. I'll try to explain that in a second here. Okay, so let's talk about the target lines real quick. So again, target lines is just saying it doesn't matter what data is being shown, but of that data, I want to have kind of a low and a high kind of metric that I can visually see here to capture this. So in this case of time by year, what I'm saying is I put a low graph saying, okay, I don't want to be entering time less than this, hopefully, and we shouldn't be entering time more than this. So let me go into editing this specific graph to show you that. Let's get into our settings, and you'll see upper target and lower target. So because this is a time analysis report, the idea is we're talking about targets of total time. And so this is time by year. We're saying, and again, this is just test data, but we're saying here, per year, I don't want to be entering in less than 10 hours of time. But we should not be entering more than 250 hours of time. So this is where you can create an upper and lower target range that will then show within your graph. So this is beneficial if you're trying to make sure everybody's, let's say everybody's entering enough time for the year. People are creating, enough, opportunities a year. There's different ways you can kind of validate that. But again, it comes down to, well, we need to be able to report on the information first before we can start kind of layering in some more of this detail. Some questions about the x-axis and y-axis. Again, some of the fields in these will not be available in both ends. So we have to have it be fields that can be kind of, again, relating or qualifying towards each other. So I can't, I can't measure, billable hours here versus actual hours here. That doesn't kind of compute. But what you can do, and this is kind of a neat thing, is a couple of these graphs, like the bar and line graph especially, there's another option here called series. So a lot of times what we can do in here is we can say, well, what's the billable status? Let's see, just add status, billing status, I believe is what it is. We'll add that into the mix as we'll call it a series. And now look at that. we're seeing, okay, this is the green line is unbilled time. That's what we haven't billed for yet. Okay, well, we should probably bill some of that, especially this year. Build time. Well, we were doing really good in billing until, a couple of years ago. And then here's time that we've written off. So it's taking that same total amount of time per year, but now saying there was this much time that was written off, this much time that was billed, and non-billed. So it's able to kind of put it all together in a new view, just all in one. So the series is kind of like a way of adding that third layer, if you will, into the graph. And that one's I think that one's probably the neatest one to kind of play with. Let's see. I'm trying to go through some more of these. I know there's so many questions. Let's say you talk about the key metric. Let's hop in there. I know that one's kind of the hot topic right now. So key metrics. Like I said earlier, that one tends to be a little bit more of the challenging one to use. So let me scroll. Here we go. So here's one I created of a key metric. I created this kind of quickly. Again, it's hard to get this thing to get the detail we're looking for because, again, we have to think it out in advance. Well, what are we trying to see? What do we want to see? Are we able to report on this currently? If so, how are we doing that? Because then we can kind of throw that into this type of field. So note that I named this one, basically it's, what's my bank account balance to date? Okay, my bank account balance right now is 45,000. I'm able to see we've credited and debited the account this much to where we're now in a positive of 45,000. Now, where is this all coming from? So let me edit that specific graph. So I've already chosen key metric for this one. So as soon as you choose key metric, all of those options go away because this one works differently. So you then have to add a metric, a field of what you want to see. At that point, then you're going to your filters, and here you can say, I only want to see, transactions that have been entered to our checking account. If I want to put a date range in here, I could put a date range filter as well. So the filters on some of these might actually have more fields available than what was available in the layout. Now, these ones, I will be honest, the key metrics tends to be a little finicky. So if you have any troubles with them, you might need to delete it and start over and try to recreate it. But that's some of the feedback we're still looking for at this time. However, it does give you the opportunity now to say, I want to create a key metric that just lets me know of, what has happened on this bank account to date. And then I might create another graph like this for a different bank account. So you might, specify specific bank accounts, and you can just kind of see the nice total, per year to date, however you want to see it, just kind of on top of each other. So hopefully that gives you kind of an idea of what key metrics is about. Obviously, key metrics will allow you to do even kind of more beyond that, and so will the other graphs. There's the ability to do custom calculations, but again, you start going down these rabbit holes of, how you want this to be set up, and sometimes it just comes down to, just ask your account manager. We'll double check that what's the easiest way to approach what you're looking for, or maybe it's something that we take up to our development team and say, hey, we're trying to accomplish this. How do we get this data more easily without having to do these kind of crazy calculations? So let me scroll back through, see what we've been asking here. A target line is a percentage. So I know we were talking about that target line before. Let's scroll back up. So the target line as a percentage. I would say, well, we would have had to have calculated the numbers as a percentage first to have that be a line at that percentage level. So I would say that might just be something that's very specific to what you're looking for. It might just take a little bit of time finessing. So it's probably what a lot of these questions are. I know this is a hot feature. Everybody loves it, and they're really trying to get some neat things out of it. But some of it is just a little challenging with the detail. Let's see, is there a way to add space between bars so the text labels don't overlap? So yeah, the text labels, I know some of them overlap. That's something we're still trying to work on and correct. I would say that's more of a, do we want to try to create a wider or taller graph? Sometimes that alone might help it, but in this case it didn't. So there's not really a way to space them out that I can remember. Wait a minute, I remember something. Just double checking. Yeah, no, I remember. I thought we were trying to do something about that, but we just at this time we just need to know what reports or what graphs are you seeing that overlap on, and we'll kind of investigate further from there. Let's see. I'm scrolling through some more of this. Can you export? There is a print button. It's not perfect. It's just going to send it to your printer or to a PDF file if you have PDF Acrobat installed as well as a print source. I'm not sure honestly why you'd want to necessarily need to print this, but you can. I would say if you're trying to get data and you're trying to export that, I would create the custom report and export that, because you can export that as like a CSV or Excel file, and that's more data that you can manipulate outside. Let's see. Let's see, something about, client rights. So currently we don't have graphs available for client logins. So if there's a need for that, let us know. Right now the client portal or client dashboard is what it is. But if you're needing this potentially to be layered in there, yeah, let us know that. How can you remove clients with 0 hours? Okay, it's a good question. So again, that's when we get into a lot of these kind of filters here. So if we have a graph where we have clients with 0 hours, well, let's say I only want to see clients where we've entered more than 100 hours. Let's go that route as well. So in the filters, we could say actual hours worked. Actual hours worked is greater than, let's find my greater than. So for example, I could say greater than 0. That would hide every client that has no time entered. We won't see them appear in the graph. But let's take it to the next level and say, you know what, I want to just focus on clients we've entered more than 100 hours with. And then when I refresh that, I should get, oh, well, I guess we don't have any clients we've entered more than 100 hours with. I apologize. So let me re-edit that. It's always the fun part of playing with these test sites we have. Okay, let's do 10 hours. Let's keep it simple. No, I'm not seeing anything. All right. So bad example. Actual hours work greater than. Let me just get rid of that row for now. Oh, did I save my change? Hold on. I apologize. Bear with me. Let's remove that for the moment. All right, so we got back to this. But yes, I would say that's where in those filters, you should be able to say, only show me clients where we've entered more than 0, greater than, if you will. Let's see, text direction. Yeah, I mean, I would just, a lot of these questions are just very specific to some of these options here. I'll say feel free to kind of play around with these, because you can have the legend, or you can even hide it, saying I don't even need to see that take up space. So yeah, you can put it to the left, right, top, bottom. Sometimes that might help with some of the overlapping text of certain areas of the page. And again, there's a lot of options that might be specific as well to the specific graph type you're choosing. So I'll just kind of reiterate, bar and pie graph are kind of very similar. Line graph is more for like date ranges and trends. Key metrics is just saying I want to pull the balance or number of a certain field. All right, let me kind of keep scrolling through. Got a few more minutes here. Can you put a custom report table on a dashboard so you can see the table below the graph? No. I mean, I would say that, the custom report, that's being used, the data set, you put in the name of the report of the graph. So that way you know what it's pulling from. I would say it's all about the graph name. Note that you can add, let me scroll up here. You can add a description. So if you want to put a very detailed description of what this is pulling, or how to read this, once you have it set up, you can add that to the report description. So users can just click on the little question mark of how that works. A lot of questions like, very technical questions here. So these are great questions, and I'm going to try to export this list for my developers here as well. But something about, sorting the values. And sometimes, yeah, that's more feedback we'll just need of, if something's not sorting in the right direction or order, we just need to know an example to look at and see kind of what's causing it to go out of order. I would say in that respect. Projects per business unit. So trying to, okay, so I've heard this before of like, we want to see how many projects do we have for a client. That one actually gets to be a little challenging because, if we're creating a custom report, it's going to be, about, transactions on that project. But trying to count how many projects, it does get a little challenging. I know there's a way to do it. I just can't remember how to do that off the top of my head here on this call right away. But I know there's a way to do like a, project count. Like, okay, all projects that have a project start date of this year, how many projects were created? There is a way to do a count. I just apologize. I don't know the trick to do that right off the bat. Can you adjust date ranges for the entire page? No. So each graph is its own entity and has its own date range. So again, that's where I would say, if you're needing graphs to be specific to different date ranges, put that in the name. Name the graph that specifically, so we know when we're looking at it, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing, last fiscal year, this fiscal year, last month, this month. I would put those as filters and have one graph for each of those variables. Hopefully this is enough information for you to, kind of start creating and building your own graphs. That's kind of the goal of this. Of course, again, if you have questions or you're running into any kind of roadblocks or questions with how to set up what you're trying to get to, let us know. But I would say, give it a shot first, see what you can create. Let us know what questions you have. We want to make sure this is as easy and as intuitive as possible. So we would like to hear your feedback on that, just initially creating one. There is help documentation on this. Yes. So if you do go to our help site, help.workamajig.com, for example, and I will type in dashboards. This one talks to you about, creating your own view, the layouts, filters, settings, and so on. So this one can kind of walk you through of, how to create your own, kind of a step-by-step. But again, I would just kind of preface that it's very similar to creating a custom report. But yeah, this link, help.workamajig.com/dashboards, would be a great resource in order to kind of guide you through this process. Let's see. Can you add labor budget info to the time detailed data set? That's a good question. So again, if we're trying to compare data that is related but not in the graph you're trying to create, let us know that. That's where we are right now. We're trying to, we've ever since our conference, we've been hearing lots of feedback, and we've been adding more and more filters, fields, related values specific to that graph. So even though these graphs are built on the kind of the custom report data set, they are actually unique as well, because we want them to work a little bit differently in certain cases. But that's where this gets to be a little challenging, because this is just kind of an open system here, and everyone wants to graph things slightly different, similar but different. So hopefully you're able to get at least kind of the basics, and then if you have more questions or more detail you need to get to, let us know. Let's see. So comparing years, I would say that's kind of close to this graph that I made up here, time detailed data by year. Let me make it a little bit wider so we can see that. So we can kind of do a comparison. You can see here per year. Now, if you're trying to see, the actual number value per year, well, then we need to approach it probably a little differently. But there's different ways we can do that. Let's see, going through some more of these. I see somebody asking about the Resource Manager dashboard. Hey, I'm glad you asked about that. So one quick thing on the Resource Manager side, we are working on, hopefully at one point, we'll have a Resource Manager Today page. And technically, there is a Resource Manager dashboard. We just don't have the button for it out because we don't know what people are needing at this point. But we hope to roll out something like that in the future. See, I'll go through a couple more questions. Yeah, I know my 2018 and 19 did not do too well. I know. love the humor in here. All right, I'll just try to scroll back up to the top real quick and see if there's anything I missed. Double checking. So if you have any last minute questions, let me know. If not, we'll start wrapping up here. Just double checking one more time. I see some errors about, exceeding, a certain amount of data. Yeah, there are going to be limits. So if you're trying to get a menu to be showing you everything, it's just like a custom report. It's having to, crunch all the data behind the scenes before it can calculate. So there may be some limits to the amount of data that can be shown. And again, that's also just feedback. We need to know which ones are causing issues, or we can assist with, hey, here's how to kind of filter it for just what you need to see. If you don't know the appropriate info for the data set, let's just go through that real quick. So that's a good question. So through our data sets, we do give a description. Some may not have a description, but a lot of them do have descriptions of what this data set is like, what's its focus, what's the data point. Hopefully the name of the custom report gives it enough info of what it's looking at. Am I looking at, client name and info of the client itself, the header of the client? Or do I need to know the project information and know what client is on that project? Well, then I need to go to a project level report to find that. So it's all about relational data is when you're getting into these custom reports of, focus on what data point we need to look at. So if we need to look at projects, sure, we need to pull clients into it, but we need project data. Clients are linked to projects, so that's just relational data at that point. Yeah, we don't have anything for like standard reports. We try to create graphs that would be most common for a role. This was our kind of our initial rollout. So a lot of the default graphs that you see here were ones that we created just to make sure so these pages weren't blank. That's the worst experience, is to open up a blank page. So we just made sure that every role has pages that are hopefully similar or close to what that person or role would be needing. Let's see, and like the P&L reports, I know those are awesome reports, but those ones are custom built with so many calculations behind them. There's not a way to create like a single graph that will mimic that. But if there's a specific number that you're trying to get to that's in the, let's say, the corporate P&L, let us know. We'll see what we need to do to kind of get that number to crunch into a graph. But again, if you just need a specific number from that report, that's what we need to focus on. Let's see. Okay. Well, I apologize, I'm not getting to all the other, there's a lot of older questions here I'm finding now. So I apologize if I don't get to them all. Last question here, monthly revenue from GL posting. So that would be, kind of like that, maybe that key metrics or bar graphs is where you could do a lot of, you could see, the month. So if you can make the, I believe that's the y-axis, be month, and the x-axis be, like transaction amount per se, then you could probably do that in that kind of way. Okay. Well, I'll leave it at this. Oh, sorry, which data set? So I would say for that of monthly revenue, well, you would want to know what GL count it's going to. Let me hop back over to my webinar graphs. So you'd want to know kind of like what GL account we're going to. That's kind of my series here, if you will. And that would be, I would say, try the GL transaction data. Try that one. And then you just need to filter down to whatever your revenue accounts are and make that, equal to those GL accounts. So, okay. I know there's a lot more questions probably that will come of this. All I can say is, please, send us your questions, send us your feedback. I definitely appreciate everyone being on here, and hopefully this was beneficial and good to hear. But yeah, shoot us an email to support@workamajig.com with either your feedback, questions, in need of help, whatever else comes from this. We'd love to hear from you. So I'll stop the recording at this time, but I thank you all for joining. Have a great day.